on behalf of Stu Kurtz, the Master of the Physical Sciences Collegiate Division, and myself, Jocelyn Malamy, the Master of the Biological Sciences Collegiate Division, it gives us a great pleasure to recognize the achievements of two of our colleagues, Eric Schwartz and David Archer, who have been awarded the 2020 Llewellyn John and Harriet Manchester Quantrell Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching. So congratulations to you both and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So as a first question, just to introduce our listeners to each of these colleagues, let me address the first question to Eric Schwartz. So Dr. Schwartz is a professor in the Department of Pharmacological and Physiological Sciences. Eric, you have been teaching 2 courses for the last number of years. Could you take a moment and just tell us about each of those courses and what led you to initiate those courses?
Well, the courses are very different, although they do have a common idea behind them. One course is actually taught at the Marine Biological Laboratory, which is an affiliate of the university. And I don't know, something like 7 years ago, the university made a formal relationship with the Marine Biological Laboratory. And my thought at that time was we had an invested interest, we should use it. And the best way we could use it was to provide courses there for our students. And I thought that having a course which was similar to the long tradition of summer courses offered at the MBL would be a tremendous experience for our students. And so there's a history of people coming internationally to spend summers at the MBL and do intensive courses. And so this was modeled after that. The course which I teach in the fall quarter here in Chicago is modeled as a graduate course specifically designed for undergraduates. By that I mean that it's a reading course and discussion course. We don't use a text. We read original papers, and the purpose is to understand what is the cutting edge of science and how does science evolve by looking at what is contemporary neuroscience.
Hello, I'm Stu Kurtz. I'm the Master of the Physical Sciences Collegiate Division, and it's my privilege to introduce David Archer, Professor of Geophysical Sciences. I have a question for David. How did you become interested in the computational side of the classes you teach, environmental science, environmental chemistry, and paleoclimatology? And how did you figure out how to include those in those classes?
Hi, Stu. I'm a computational scientist myself, and so the way I kind of look at a situation scientifically is if we can simulate it, make a toy model of it that does the same thing, then I feel like we sort of understand it. And I've sort of ramped up and gotten more and more into making undergraduates do little computational projects in Python or a spreadsheet or something like that, because a lot of them have never really seen that before. You can take an excellent Python class through CS at the university and you learn how to sort numbers or something, but applying a scripting language or something to simulating groundwater chemistry flow or something like that is something that you know, students are, it's good for them to see it because they haven't seen it before.
Why don't I follow up with a question that's very similar to what Jocelyn was asking Eric, and that is that your teaching style includes having your students read and discuss journal articles. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it works for you and why you do it?
Yeah, I came to this kind of sideways. I was prepping to do a new class to me in paleoclimatology, the study, reconstruction of climate changes in Earth's past and what can it tell us about, you know, climate changes in the future. And I was reading the textbook and then I was going to some of the original papers and I got such a different impression about the science, about just the state of the science from reading a couple of opposed papers than I would get from looking at a chapter, even if it describes, the opposition of the papers perfectly, accurately. You somehow just get a different impression. So I sort of evolved into a show and tell model where I will assign three students to host a paper each, and save it till the last 15 minutes, of the class period or something. So my lecture kind of preps, and then the student is supposed to get up and show the money plot and, pull out the essence of the paper and describe it in a quick sort of a thing. I never criticize the students or challenge them. Anything they come up with is great. And after a few weeks of doing this, they really start to get enthusiastic about it because they feel empowered to read these papers, even if they don't understand every word.
So, and this is mostly just to Eric, but really could apply to either one of you. One of the things that I've noticed is that your courses have a theme of helping students understand how we know what we know. And I think, I know, Eric, where I've seen students' comments on your courses, in both of your courses, students have commented almost exactly on that point from word to word, that these courses have helped me understand how I know, how scientists know what they claim to know. Can you talk a little bit about how you manage to communicate that to your students?
Well, that's exactly the sort of the underlying theme for both of the courses which I teach. In the intense course at MBL, the notion there is that what we know depends upon the instruments we use. And we have to understand what the instruments are actually measuring in order to really assess what is being reported. Furthermore, it gives us the opportunity to create new instruments and to modify existing instruments. Likewise, in a reading course here in Chicago, the methods which are actually used and how those methods have evolved with time is an important part of understanding what the result is. And I think that knowing the method by which we acquire data is just as important as what the data or the results are.
I think that really applies to what you were describing in your course, David, because papers themselves and close analysis of papers really fits under that exact same theme, I think.
Yes, especially if you come up against the ragged edge of our knowledge and we actually don't know, why it was so much hotter in the Pliocene when the CO2 levels were the same as today and sea level was 20 meters higher. We don't know, and it's kind of freaky, that was the case, but we don't know why.
And how do your students handle that, that coming up against that ragged edge of the unknown?
How do any of us, I guess?
I think that I would say that it's often the case that students feel a little bit out of their depth, challenged when they start a course. But with time and just a few weeks of practice, they get into it and they feel much more comfortable once they realize that they really can come to grips and understand these things. I imagine it's just the same in your course, David. Yeah.
And then toward the end of the quarter, they actually are feeling good enough that they can, be kind of nasty, actually, to the authors of these papers. They can see that they're just humans like the rest of us.
Right.
In a good-natured way, of course.
But I think that's one of the transitions which I hope to create during a course, is that the students actually make that shift.
Yeah, I find this in my classes. I teach the lower level students that they come in with the impression that almost everything has been solved already. And then I imagine your courses are a rude awakening for those students.
They're intended to be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for the paleoclimate, it's especially interesting if the uncertainties about the past then reflect onto uncertainties about the future.
So I have a question for David. You have an unusual approach to student assessment, giving students assignments without deadlines and the opportunity to redo them for a better grade. Can you tell us more about this, what your theory is behind it and how well it's worked in practice?
There's not really a theory behind this. I just kind of didn't want to deduct points for, you know, when the thing is handed in. And I kind of felt like if you set a deadline and you're harsh about it, you're kind of letting the student off the hook, you know, well, time's up, I got to hand it in, even though it's, you know, half done or whatever. Whereas if they don't have that threat, then they have to sort of deal with it sooner or later. My hope was that they would develop the initiative to do things, you know, on time, because it stays in synchrony with the lecture material. But in practice, that has been, I would say, an absolute failure. Nobody does that. But maybe people, you know, grow from this experience. I sort of want to treat them like colleagues. I don't want to treat them like children. And, you know, they don't go all the way to professional on the ball colleagues in a quarter, but, you know, maybe it helps some of them get started. I don't know.
They certainly think so.
I think, Eric, you also have sort of a gentle approach to assessments that you've told us about.
Well, I start with the fact that I never liked taking exams, and I assume that my students are the same. And so I usually begin the class by offering or having a discussion and offering that we can develop any grading system which they're comfortable with. And we put out several. And usually what they decide is that they would prefer to emphasize classroom discussion and forego all exams. So that's what we do. And once everybody has agreed, everybody's on board, then coming to class and actually participating in the discussion is the most important thing. And that's really what I most enjoy.
Very good.
So, Eric, I received a couple of questions forwarded from some of your students. And one of them was, how did you become particularly interested in the instrumentation of optics? I imagine this is one of your MBL students asking this question.
Specifically optics. Well, by training, I'm actually graduated from medical school. And when I finished medical school, I did a short residency in pathology, which I had to use a microscope. And I always enjoyed looking at images. Later on, when I started doing science, I still maintained that, and I dabbled a little bit because I had a good friend in the anatomy department, and I would go over and visit him and see what he was doing. And he was an electron microscopist, or he did freeze fracture replicas, and I liked looking at them. Now, for probably at least 20 years in my career, I really did electrophysiology. But at one point, I decided that I wanted to shift what I was doing, and I've become more interested in optics now and in imaging, and that's what I do in the laboratory. But I also am aware that there's been a tremendous change in the technical ability to look through a microscope. We now have so-called super resolution. And to understand how that works, you have to know a little bit about optics. So it was a natural thing for me to do.
And David, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background as well.
Well, my experience with teaching has been similar to what I heard Eric say, in that it pulls me into things that I would not have, it broadens me. I find, you know, I did a global warming class for a long time, and I knew all about carbon chemistry in the oceans, but I didn't really understand the greenhouse effect. And my environmental chemistry class, you know, was a big stretch to start, and my paleoclimate class, I wasn't really a deep time person by training. So some of the most broadening aspects of my career have been the classes that it's a privilege to be able to teach classes you're not qualified to teach. Just speaking for myself, no reflection on Eric here, that's just me.
No, David, I agree completely. I often say I teach what I don't know, or more aptly, I teach what I would like to know. And sometimes I structure the course where it begins with something I am very familiar with, but then diverges into areas I would like to explore. And so I tell the students that this is a joint venture. I am just a little bit ahead of them. I have a lot of years of experience, but I'm reading some of these papers for the first time as well. And it's an opportunity for me to go into a different sub area every year. And so the course changes every year as my interests change. So unfortunately, my students have to persevere with my interests.
Even things that one feels one knows really well, at least I have found, that to break them back down all the way to the basics to be able to explain them to a new student coming in reveals one's own knowledge gaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's nothing like teaching to learn a material.
And to realize that you don't know what you thought you knew quite so clearly.
So I have a question maybe for the both of you. As long as we're in this space, can you think about a time where an interaction in your class has maybe changed the way that you've thought about some aspect of your discipline?
Well, I was doing my global warming class and reviewing carbon footprint, you know, where our carbon footprint comes from, which prompted me to stop going on airplanes. So that has had a big impact on my personal life, if that counts.
Well, it's easy for me to think of an example which just happened this past quarter. A student came to me and asked me if I would write a reference for an internship they wanted to take at the Collège de France. And I spoke to them a little bit about with whom they were going to work. And I had to admit I didn't know much about that person's work. So when the course was over, I picked up a book which this investigator had written and read through it. And then corresponded with the student and said, you know, gee, thank you. That was very good. I enjoyed it. And it opened me up to an area I wasn't aware of. And that happens with some frequency.
Very cool.
I bet our students would be very interested to know if you have any new idea. Do you plan to continue teaching the courses you're teaching, or do you have any ideas for courses that you would like to develop in the future?
Oh, I do have an idea for a course I would like to develop, which is, we often read in the press about the impact of artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence is modeled on neural behavior. But I think it would be rather interesting to teach a course with perhaps 2 colleagues in which the biology, the computer science, and the legal and social implications or consequences of artificial intelligence are explored. And so if I can find 2 colleagues willing to co-teach that with me, I think it would be an interesting course.
My environmental chemistry class is kind of required for the major, so I have to keep manning that. And my Phi-Sci class was another obligation which I have been relieved of by a cherished colleague of mine who has taken over. So that's enabled me to do the paleoclimate class, which I've only done twice now. So I'm gonna stick with that for a little while. I don't have any super duper ideas for something else I'd like to do, but if somebody, you know, in my department wanted to do one of the ones I'm doing, I'd be delighted to try to come up with something new. It's always a rush to do a new class. It's a rare privilege.
I think there are some big gaps or things that we should be teaching that we're not teaching right now.
Well, there'd be a lot of room for some sort of big ideas class about climate, I would think. That hasn't really gelled in a way that that I have been involved in, but a lot of scope for that.
I don't know that there's a particular area, but there is a sort of philosophy or thread that I think we should probably stress a little bit more. And it goes back to what David said a few minutes ago, that students read a textbook and they think that it's all solved, and the facts are very clear. And I think that we need to stress that science and the way we look at the world is only the way we look at it today. It's evolving, and it depends upon our history. It depends upon the instruments we use. And to see science as a more dynamic process, a process of ever-changing worldview, I think it could be emphasized more.
So between the two of you, you see a lot of University of Chicago students at a number of different levels. Do you feel that they're being, when they come to you, have they been prepared to accept the kind of education that you're providing? Do you feel that their high school or whatever they have had before they get to us is preparing them in the right ways?
Yeah, sure. I always start from the beginning. So even in my environmental chemistry class, which has chemistry as a prerequisite, I don't assume that everybody's up, you know, they've got thermodynamics right, you know, front and center in their minds. I kind of start from zero. But yeah, the students, I love teaching undergrads here. They're, you know, you give them every rung of the ladder and they just scamper right up.
I quite agree. I think our students are very, very able. I do not have requirements, prerequisites for the courses I teach. I refuse to do that. I believe that if anybody is interested, then I can break down the subject and present it. And that special knowledge is not required. Anything that is required for the courses can be done within the course. And consequently, we've had, for example, the MBL courses, I can think of a student who was an English major, another who was in economics. True, the majority of the students are in neuroscience, computer science, physics, or chemistry, or sometimes even math. But anybody who has an interest, I'm happy to have in class.
Yeah, I've had some great philosophy majors.
Exactly. I mean, I remember one student who was interested in art conservation and wanted to come and take the course because he thought that spectroscopy and imaging would be an important part, something he wanted to learn. And so, it's been, you know, we shouldn't be too narrow in defining people into subjects or you know, majors.
And how did you find those students did in the course? Were they able to keep up?
Terrific. And I think they enjoyed the course. Yeah.
As long as we're on the topic of broadening the scope of our classes, David, you're known for recommending books and movies to students to augment what's going on in class. Can you give us any recommendations?
There was somebody from the press office was writing a thing and she asked for book recommendations as part of this. And what I came up with, not wanting to ever waste a good teaching moment, was Jared Diamond's Collapse for a nonfiction book, and a book by somebody, Saint Marie, somebody called Station 11, a fiction book about a much worse pandemic than we have had, but, you know, to kind of a meditation on the fragility of the human enterprise. I kind of, this whole sort of looming pandemic coming over us like a tidal wave in the winter quarter resonated like alarmingly with my, the mass extinctions I was doing in my paleo climate class.
So it's interesting that you mentioned Jared Diamond, David, because when I was at UCLA as a postdoc, Jared Diamond was in the Department of Physiology, and we would occasionally have lunch together.
Oh,
but his
wow.
career has now diverged remarkably from that initial start in academics.
From birds?
To birds or language or cultural history, a number of topics which he's gone into.
Yeah, I love his books.
Yeah, I think he's an example of an individual who can easily migrate between fields and doesn't have to be constrained by any particular field. And I think that's what we should encourage our students to do in general.
So Eric, are you going to recommend a book?
I'm always hesitant to recommend a book because, you know, what I read is my personal taste, and I don't expect other people to share that. I usually tell students if they want to read something, read outside your field, get new ideas, and then bring them back.
So we're in a a very strange educational world, of course, right now, and not looking to be back to normal anytime soon. Do you have any thoughts as educators of how students or how other faculty should be thinking about the challenges that are coming with remote learning?
Well, as somebody who objects to gratuitous travel for climate reasons, I was kind of hoping for, you know, a flowering of new technology, and that we would learn how to, you know, solve the etiquette and the technological problems and the security and everything, and you know, make some lemonade out of these lemons. But the departmental seminars in my department, nobody wanted to do them over Zoom. I've given seminars over Zoom before this pandemic happened, and it's, you know, it's clumsy. So I was sort of hoping for more. It seems like this isolation is really kind of killing the social. It's killing something in our you know, in our interactions.
Yeah, I'm a part of a national, international, I suppose, seminar series in my own field, and within an hour, 900 people signed up for it.
I'm wondering if maybe you guys could reflect a little bit on the way teaching at the university has changed over the years and where you think we might be headed. Maybe I'll put David in the hot seat first.
Well, so Dorian Abbott is evolving my global warming class. You should ask him about the future. I'm the past. He's flipping the classroom and experimenting with all these new technologies. I didn't figure out how to, with a big, you know, 300-person class like that, I didn't come up with the creative ideas of how to flip it, but he is doing that. So he's the person to talk to.
So as sort of the student's choice, because this is very much just reminding people that we're talking about the Quantrell Awards, which are based on student nominations for people who don't know. So the students have obviously really appreciated the messages that the two of you are trying to get out to them. So as we wrap up this interview, do you have any sort of thoughts for these students, recommendations to them going forward? Not even specific to this time of pandemic, but just in general as they go through college and think about their lives going forward?
I just want to empower them. I want them to do whatever they, you know, to feel like they can accomplish what they want to accomplish, because, you know, they can.
I would say that the course is never finished. I mean, the course is only a model for how they should continue to think and operate and study in the future. Presumably it gives them a way of assimilating and evaluating new things that will happen in the future. I think that to give an education which is static or frozen on the day you graduate would be silly. What we want is that they learn a process by which they can continue to evolve. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I went to a medical school, but you can imagine what kind of physician I would be if I simply only knew the state of medicine 50 years ago. What you want to be able to do is accommodate and integrate all the changes that will be taking place in the future. And that's what I think the real challenge is.
That's a fantastic message and a great place for us to end. So I thank Eric and David very much for taking the time to talk to us, and congratulate you again on this very prestigious award.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.